The Game of the Old Jar. In a village that seemed to rise from the earth itself, nestled between the green hills and ancient oak trees, there was a small shop that had become the heart of the community. This shop was run by a man named Elias, a shopkeeper known as much for his wisdom as for his kindness. He wasn't the richest man in the village, but he was certainly the most respected. His shop sold everything from herbs to cloth, from tools to trinkets. It was a little bit of everything, and it was loved by all who visited. Elias had lived in the village for as long as anyone could remember. He was a man of deep thought, always ready with a piece of advice or a clever solution to any problem that arose. His gentle manner and calm demeanor had earned him the trust of the villagers. He was the first person people turned to when they were in need, and he was always there with a friendly smile. But recently, something had begun to trouble Elias. Over the past few weeks, he had noticed that small items were going missing from his shop. A few herbs here, a trinket or two there, and once, even a small pouch of coins. At first, Elias thought it might be his forgetfulness. He was getting older after all. But as time passed, the disappearances became too frequent to ignore. Someone was stealing from him, and the thief was careful, always striking when no one was looking. Elias, however, wasn't a man to jump to conclusions. He had spent his life observing people, studying their habits, their gestures, and their words. He had learned that people often revealed more than they realized through their actions. But he had no evidence, no proof. The thief was smart, and Elias needed a plan, something subtle, something that would catch the thief without anyone knowing. One evening, after closing his shop and locking the door behind him, Elias sat in the back of his small home, sipping a cup of tea and pondering the problem. He was alone, except for his cat, Whiskers, who sat perched on the windowsill, staring out into the darkening village street. His mind drifted to an old jar that had been sitting in the corner of the shop for years. The jar was nothing special, a dusty, old thing with chipped edges and a faded label. Elias had never thought much of it. It was just a relic from a time long past, given to him by a former customer who swore it was a magical jar. The customer had claimed that it could reveal secrets, uncover lies, and expose hidden truths. Elias had always smiled and humored the man, thinking it was nothing more than an amusing piece of folklore. The jar had sat forgotten for years, gathering dust. But now, as Elias sat there, the idea struck him like a bolt of lightning. What if the jar was the key to catching the thief? What if, just as the old man had said, it could reveal something that no one else could see? Elias knew one thing: it was worth a try. The next morning, Elias set the plan into motion. He carefully placed the jar on the counter at the front of his shop, right in the center, where it would be hard to miss. He didn't say a word about it to anyone. He simply let the jar sit there, looking as ordinary as ever, though Elias knew that it was anything but. The shop was bustling that day, as it always was. Villagers came in to buy their daily needs, chatting with Elias as they browsed the shelves. The usual suspects appeared: old Mrs. Thompson, who always asked for the most obscure spices, young Margaret, who came to buy thread for her sewing, and little Henry, the baker's son, who was always keen to buy some sweet treats with whatever coins he could spare. But there was one person Elias was waiting for, the one he suspected might be behind the thefts. Finn was a young man in his early 20s, new to the village, with a roguish air about him. He had a charm that won people over, but Elias had always felt something was off about him. The way Finn lingered in the shop, eyeing the goods, always seeming to know exactly when Elias was busy elsewhere. Elias had watched him carefully in recent weeks, and his suspicions had only grown. That afternoon, just as Elias was helping a customer pick out some herbs, Finn walked into the shop, whistling a jaunty tune. Elias greeted him with a warm smile, trying to act as casual as possible. "Good afternoon, Finn. How are you today?" "Oh, I'm doing just fine, Elias," Finn replied, his eyes scanning the shelves. "I thought I'd come in and buy a little something for my grandmother. You know, a bit of that nice lavender you sell." "Of course, I've got some fresh stock in the back," Elias said, moving toward the shelves. "I'll fetch it for you." As Elias moved toward the back of the shop, he kept a careful eye on Finn through the corner of his vision. Finn, seemingly lost in thought, walked over to the counter where the jar sat. Elias's heart beat faster. He knew this was the moment. He couldn't help but smile to himself as he watched Finn eye the jar. It was exactly as he had hoped. Finn had always been a little too interested in the most expensive items, and now the old jar had caught his attention. Finn hesitated for a moment before he slowly reached out and touched the jar. Elias, still pretending to be busy with the lavender, watched closely. The moment Finn's fingers made contact with the jar, something strange happened. The jar seemed to shimmer, its surface rippling slightly as if it were alive. Finn jerked his hand back, startled, but Elias could see the flicker of guilt in his eyes. The jar had worked, just as Elias had hoped. Elias stepped forward then, catching Finn's eyes with his own. "You found the jar," Elias said softly, his voice casual but knowing. "It's an old thing. Been in my family for years. They say it's magical, you know." Finn looked flustered, his face turning red as he tried to laugh off his unease. "Magical? Oh, I didn't know that. Just thought it was an old relic or something." Elias smiled, but his eyes were sharp. "Oh, yes. It's magical, all right. They say it reveals the truth about people, about their intentions. I suppose it's no surprise it caught your attention." Finn swallowed nervously, clearly trying to mask his discomfort. "I didn't mean anything by it, Elias. Just admiring the jar, that's all." Elias didn't say another word. He simply nodded, allowing the silence to hang in the air for a moment. He watched Finn carefully, noting the way the young man shifted uneasily, the way his hands fidgeted. "You know," Elias continued, his tone light but carrying weight, "the jar can be quite revealing. They say it shows who people really are when they think no one's watching. It's funny how that works." Finn's eyes darted to the counter, then back to Elias. I didn't take anything," he stammered. "I'm just here to buy some lavender." Elias's smile never faltered. "Of course, Finn. Of course. But you see, the jar reveals much more than that. It shows what's hidden beneath the surface. And sometimes what it shows isn't so pleasant." There was a long, tense pause and Finn began to sweat. His fingers twitched at his sides, and his gaze darted nervously to the door, as if looking for an escape. "You know," Elias continued, his voice almost gentle, "sometimes people think they can get away with small things. A coin here, a trinket there. But the truth always comes out, Finn. It always does." Finn's face went pale, his eyes wide. He opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. Elias stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I know what you've been doing, Finn. I know you've been taking things from my shop. Little by little, as if no one would notice. But the jar noticed. It always notices." Finn's shoulders slumped, and for a moment, Elias could see the shame on his face. The young man didn't say anything. He didn't need to. His silence was confession enough. "I'm sorry," Finn finally muttered, looking at the floor. "I didn't mean to. I thought I could just take a little bit. I didn't think anyone would care." Elias placed a hand on Finn's shoulder. "It's not the taking that's the problem, Finn. It's the dishonesty. You've got to be careful, my friend. Small things lead to bigger things, and before you know it, you've lost yourself in the lies." Finn nodded, tears welling up in his eyes. "I'm so sorry, Elias. I'll make it right. I promise." Elias gave him a reassuring smile. "You'll be fine. But remember this, Finn, honesty is worth more than all the trinkets in the world." And with that, Elias let Finn leave the shop, a little wiser and a little more humble than when he entered. The next day, word spread quickly throughout the village about the magic jar and the way Elias had caught the thief. Villagers came to Elias to congratulate him, impressed by his wisdom and the way he had handled the situation with such grace. They marveled at how he had used a seemingly useless old jar to reveal the truth and how he had turned a potential scandal into a lesson of kindness and redemption. From that day forward, Elias's shop continued to thrive, and the story of the magical jar was told for generations to come. The villagers knew one thing for certain. Elias was not only a wise shopkeeper, he was a man who understood that the truth always finds its way to the surface, no matter how deeply it's buried. And sometimes, it only takes a little game with an old jar to reveal it.